Royal Risings family, how are y'all doing out there? Welcome to the first episode of Black History Without Borders and Beyond, brought to you by Chancellor Woodson. My name is Durante Lamar, and I'm going to be your host for today. So often when we talk about Black history, we have a tendency to limit it to things that have just happened either in America or things that have happened just for the benefit of America, which unfortunately leaves out a lot of great names such as Marcus Garvey, Nat Turner, Dutty Boukman, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Mansa Musa, Akhenaten, and the list literally goes on. So to kind of help as a solution to this problem, we put together a few episodes that we'd like to share with you that takes the story of Black history further beyond you could have ever imagined. Today's episode is going to be about the Treaty at Thebes and the Black Church. Sounds interesting, right? Let's dive in. The Treaty of Thebes takes place approximately December the 22nd, 640 Common Era. This would be the 7th century. Bishop Cyrus of Alexandria outmaneuvered the Byzantines, who were the Eastern Roman Empire, by working with the invading Muslims to oust the Byzantines from Lower Egypt, particularly Alexandria, and enacted a peace treaty that shielded, though temporarily, the Copts, who were the native Egyptians, from Muslim interruption and protected the Coptic wealth in Alexandria from being taken as loot or as spoils in the capture of Alexandria. All right, so the result of this agreement allowed for Pope Benjamin I of Alexandria to return and restructure the Coptic Church after centuries of devastation. Now, what's interesting here is that this word Coptic at this time, the word Coptic was synonymous with the word Nubian. All right. So what we do know about this Coptic church is that this is a Black church, and look at that. Pope Benjamin I of Alexandria, he had been exiled. He had been exiled by the Byzantines, and what's funny is Bishop Cyrus, which is the one who kind of gets this whole thing running. He's the one that actually had Pope Benjamin exiled. Well, a part of this treaty was getting the Pope back there. All right, so Cyrus requested 3 additional favors from the Muslims, namely, he said, do not break your treaty with the Copts. All right, do not break your treaties with the Copts, with the native Egyptians, the native Nubian Egyptians who live here. Do not break your treaty with them. If number 2, if the Byzantines after this repudiation ask for peace, do not make peace with them. All right, do not make peace with them, but treat them as captives. And then number 3, he said, when I'm dead, please allow me to be buried in the Church of St. John at Alexandria. Now, again, this is Black history that we're sharing here that's taking place in the 7th century. This is 62240. There's more. Cyrus's move, even though he was a Byzantine installment, allowed for the return of Pope Benjamin, thus ending 200 years of Byzantine persecution of the Coptic Orthodox Christians since the Council of Chalcedon, which, if my numbers are correct, I want to say that's 451. I know that's not too far off, and it should be dead on, but that's 451, could be 52, 53, but I believe that's 451. So the Copts had been under persecution since this council, okay? These Nubians had been under persecution, or I'll say it like this, they had been under increased persecution since this council. One of the things I can share from my personal studies is one of the things that I was interested in was the early persecution of Christians. As a way to kind of find the historicity, I'm looking for the more historical story, other than just what we've shared, in the mythological senses and the mythological senses. As a person with an academic inclination, I wanted a little more comprehension of the historicity of the story of Christianity. So I was looking up, kind of looking into the early persecutions of the Christian faith, and at first I really couldn't find it. It looked like these persecutions had been drastically exaggerated, at first glance. And it's honestly because I was looking in the wrong place. When you look for especially studying through Western Christianity views or perspectives, when you look for persecution of Christians, it's hard to find. But when you add the word Coptic to it, then you find something a little different. You don't find much persecution of the Roman Christians. You don't find much persecution of those of the Byzantine Empire. It's in particularly all of these persecutions that the Christians take claim for today were primarily those persecutions were primarily ethno-religious based. So they had no problems with one sect of Christians, but the dark Christians there was an issue with, specifically the ones who were native to that particular land. So within the Coptic Church, Pope Benjamin is regarded as the greatest pope of all time. Now, that should kind of stun you a little bit because Pope Benjamin is probably not in the list of popes that most people are um, are familiar with. All right. Well, the popehood is something that we need to pay real close attention to because many Americans assume that the Pope in Rome is the only pope, and that is purposeful miseducation, many times based on a race-based agenda. There are currently at least four reigning popes. You hear me? Currently, at least four reigning popes. Let me show them to you. You see them there? There are currently at least four reigning popes, and you see every single one of them right there. Every single one of them right there. I might need to move a little bit. Yep, you see that guy? All right. All right, and let's see. You see the gentleman that you're more familiar with in the white suit. We know him. That's Pope Francis. He's the head of the Roman Catholic Church. And then this brother right here, he's in the top of the corner, but you see him. You see him over here. You see him right there. That's him. That's him. That's Pope Tawadros of the Coptic Church. All right. And then he's also directly above me. I can't even reach all the way up there. But he's also directly above me, above the gentleman that's above me. And then there's Pope Theodore II of the Greek Orthodox Church. He's the one that's directly above me, this guy, yeah. And then the one that's behind me that I'm blocking, I guess I'm hating on him low-key, I'm blocking, that's Pope Peter of the Palmyrenian Catholic Church. All right, so there's at least four reigning popes. Okay, and I bet you this is something that you've never, that many of you never heard or never knew before. But this is the case, and let me go ahead and let you see Pope Tawadros of the Coptic Church in full there, kind of with his entourage around him. Let me move it around a little bit so you can see everybody. Look at that. Look at that. And so that's Pope Tawadros of the Catholic Church, okay? One of the greatest, of the Coptic Church. One of the greatest contentions of the early church was actually Rome's attempt to assert the authority of the original authors of the faith, who collaborated on the faith right there in Egypt. There are just as many ancient fragments of the original manuscripts of letters and the Gospels in Egypt as there are anywhere else. Okay, so this is interesting here. So there actually was a lot of contention at the time. As a matter of fact, for the longest time, Rome had no specific seat of authority. This myth of Rome being the central power of Christianity, that's a recent phenomenon. That was not the case for a very long time. It wasn't even the case. It was not even the case at the Council of Nicaea. Do you understand? And then you'd really have to look at that guest list to understand that for sure, which most people haven't. We do a lot of talking and we don't, let's make sure we're going back and actually taking a look at those things, because the Council of Nicaea, when you look at it, it was actually a very beautiful meeting. A lot of people have attached a lot of stuff, a lot of extra stuff to it that's just not there. And we'll talk about that in a later episode too. But back to this Pope stuff, the first time the term Pope is actually used to refer to the leader Yariklas in Egypt. All right, the term was not used for any other leaders until Rome usurped authority over 400 years later. All right. So the first time the word pope was used, it was indeed used to reference a black man. That's a little bit of black history for you that you're probably not used to getting, right? Okay. So this is good. And it's funny because as you see here, the world went from one black pope to uh three white popes and one black pope. Ain't that something? Ain't that something? This is black history. This is black history, so we can talk about it. All right. So why is this important? Why are we talking about this? Why is what's going on in 622 Common Era, December the 22nd, in this location in the between the Byzantine Empire and the Muslims and these two figures that I've never heard of before, called the what did you call them? You call them Bishop Cyrus of Alexandria and Pope Benjamin the First of Alexandria. So you've given me a little bit of information. You let me know that there was a black bishop and a black pope at 622 in 622 Common Era. So that's some new information. You've also let me know that there's more than one pope currently. And remember I said there's at least four. There's actually more than that. However, how they want to be recognized is a totally different thing. But the oldest of all of those four, let's go back for a moment. Well, no, we'll leave that. The oldest of all of those four is the Coptic Church. It's the Coptic Church. So the black church is the oldest historical church, as it's supposed to, as it compares to Christianity. Rome has a lot of issues with proving its validity. All right, this is good. This is good. All right. So why is this important? Well, number one, it's important because of its location. Okay, it's important because of its location. Where is it located at? Do you see that? It's located in, this is going on, or the fight is centrally over Alexandria. Okay? It's centrally over Alexandria, which if you look on this map here, you see it? Alexandria is right up at that tippy top above Egypt. That's where Alexandria is, all right? Which means this is in Africa, okay? This is in Africa, and this is in Africa at a time that we know is black, and we're going to learn a little bit more about that in this episode. And you can go check this information out for yourself and find it as well. But we just love being the one to introduce you to it. All right, so this is important because of its location, and location. And then number two, this is important because the primary characters, at least from our perspective, are black. They are definitively black, and they are definitively Christian. More than 700 years. This is important. They are definitively black and definitively Christian more than 700 years prior to the first European ship ever touching down on the west coast of Africa. The implications are astounding. Before there was a King James version of the Bible, there was a black church. Before there was a Protestant Reformation, there was a black church. Before there was a Holy Roman Empire, there was a black church. And in a later episode, we're going to show you how Martin Luther actually relied on that black church for theological validation during his so-called Reformation. All right, so now, though the black church in America is undoubtedly biologically the descendants of the black church, it is also undeniably not theologically the descendants of it. All right, so we're biologically descendants of it, and just to kind of give you this, one of the things that you definitely want to study is the oral traditions of West Africa, because according to the oral traditions of West Africa, Africa has always been a conglomerate of moving tribes, and so even the people, moving tribes, moving houses, moving kingdoms, moving empires, if you will, all collaborating together, and so a lot of the people who ended up in what can sort of be called modern day or medieval Ghana, medieval time Ghana, were people who had came from Egypt and who had also came from Ethiopia. They had hit that rotation circuit a few times, all right? So there is a strong connection between West Africa and Egypt. And again, that's going to be one of those things we're going to talk about in another episode. But so even though, yes, the black church is the black church in America is undoubtedly the biological descendants of this great historical church, we are not theologically the descendants of it. The American church gets its theological validation from Rome and its offspring, without any consideration for the much older Coptic authority. And there are a lot of differences, a lot of very distinct differences between Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity. And then even it's not even that simple, because just like in Western Christianity, there are many divides. So there isn't just Catholicism, there's Protestantism, and then even within that, there's Calvinism, and then it goes on down. You got Baptist, Methodist, Episcopalians, and the Pentecostals, Apostolics. The list goes on and on and on. That's Western. But for the most part, all of those groups, except for the groups at the very, very top, adhere to the same 66. Now, the groups at the very, very top, they adhere to a few more than that. Why? Because they're a little closer to the story. All right, they're close to the beginning of that, so they got a little more. Everybody else is kind of is a part of a divide. I don't know why they don't just like to call it what it is, but it's a part of a divide, and so the more you divide, the more you lose on the way down. So the same way, that's the same way with the Eastern Church. So it's not as if Eastern Christians all believe the same thing. As a matter of fact, between those Eastern Christians, they're split already between the Greeks, the Coptics, and now these people, the Palmyrenians, and may possibly many, many more. But theologically, the distinct differences actually revolve around stuff that the conscious community and the Christian community can't seem to get along about in America right now. Which, interestingly enough, if the black church in America had come up under the Eastern theology as opposed to the Western theology, they would actually be able to find a middle ground with their conscious brothers and sisters. Isn't that some interesting black history for you? Can I get an ashe out there? Yeah. Okay. So let's also talk about this. Let's talk about the word Coptic. The word Coptic actually, for the most part of history, up until modern times, so through medieval times, the word Coptic was synonymous with the word Nubia, Egypt, and Christian. All right, and I'm gonna go ahead and prove to you how the word Coptic was, or I'll break down to you. I won't say prove. I'll go ahead and break down to you how the word Coptic was synonymous with Egypt and Christian. The word is literally the same as Egypt, which comes from the Meduneter Het Ka Ptah. All right, and that's HWT or HET. People do all different types of things, and the vowels are kind of variable there. And then Ka, K-A. If you're a Dragon Ball Z fan, Kamehameha, you know that thing. Het Ka Ptah, all right, Ptah, all right, which is almost like a grand architect, the principle of the grand architect deity of the old kingdom. Okay, and so in this word Het Ka Ptah, this word is what was used to describe Egypt. It's actually where we get the word Egypt from. It meant the temple or people of the Ka, soul, sort of soul, energy, life of Ptah. All right, simplified as a Copt, which is where we get Egypt. Okay, all right, and then modernized as Copt, just the Ka Ptah. And you got it, Copt, or as we now say, Copt. Ka is the soul that survives death. That's a powerful thing. Okay, that's a powerful thing. So when they came in contact with these people in Egypt, or these people that they called the expansive Nubians, they called this place. Okay, these are the people of the soul of the great Creator. These are the people who have the soul, who have the soul that survives death of the great Creator of the universe. All right, and so then there's this word that rises out of that the Greeks put together by putting together ka and rust, charist, which the Greeks translated as Christos, which is the soul of the Creator return. All right, that's just a little bit of black history. Okay, so even the very concept of Christ comes from, where does it come from, y'all? Where does it come from? It comes from the black church, or it comes from black Egypt. It comes from black Egypt, which ultimately is the beginning, or for what we know as now, because I can argue that Ethiopia has a longer running there, but we'll talk about that in another episode. But But also notice how the many rituals of the Catholic Church, as well as the Coptic Church, mirror the rituals of ancient Kemet, even down to the popes choosing royal names, which means, once they are enthroned, if you will, and that's the word that they used. Hello. Once they are enthroned, they become the papas, father of the house. Okay. All right, which the word Pharaoh literally meant man of the house. All right, so they become the papas, which we call Pope now, but they become the father or the patriarch, and they take a patriarch name, if you will, which in ancient Kemet, they would take a Horus name, and at different times, different god names, or a Heru name, sorry. They would take a Heru name. So they would add a name, or they would take an Aten name, or an Atum name. They would name themselves according to what specific particular principle they wanted to be associated with. These are the same things that the Catholic and Coptic churches do. So it's once you start studying history without the blinders and without borders and beyond, you really get this beautiful picture that the Black church is bigger than what we've imagined, and Black history is even bigger. All right, so let's end with a little history on the Copts by way of the Coptic Church. All right, so let's start with a picture of Saint Marcos. All right, I do believe, there we are. Let's start with a picture of Saint Marcos. All right, or as you know him, Saint Mark. The picture is a 17th century replica of a 4th century relic. So this is what the early church thought of Saint Mark. This is what they thought he looked like. Let's see if I can make him a little bigger for y'all. Because let's look at him. Let's get a good look here. Do y'all see Saint Mark there? This is what, now again, in all fairness, this is a replica. So this replica is from the 17th century, but it is a replica of a 4th century relic. All right. So you will have no problem. Just Google Saint Mark, go to images, and you'll come across this one. And most time it groups images that look like it in the same category, and you'll see the older replica. And it's actually a little darker than this. Over time, things tend to get lighter on the western side of the world. But watch this. So this is Saint Marcos here, who most of you know as Saint Mark, or have heard of as Saint Mark, which you learned about as you matriculated through Sunday school. If you come from the Christian upbringing, I do believe the Islams also recognize Brother Mark as well. But the picture is a 7th century replica of that. Okay, so but this is what the early church thought Saint Mark looked like. They obviously thought that he was a brother. They obviously felt that he was a brother. I love pictures, man. Somebody said bring the receipts. Now, Saint Mark the Evangelist, Marcos, is said to have founded the Apostolic See of Alexandria and to have become its first patriarch or its first pope. And unlike the other apostles, Mark has an interesting story now. For anybody who would find themselves wanting to be, on the other side of disproving the historicity of Christianity, they would have an easy time with all of the apostles except for Mark. Mark is a little interesting because of the history that's been kept so well at Alexandria. So there's a lot of claims there that need to be searched out, but that's the purpose of history, to get your mind out of the box. And if you believe something, man, go forward and see if you can find the evidence to support it, man. And that's what history is for, so that we don't have to rely on the mythology. And please understand, mythology is a part of history. So I'm not saying do away with that. No, we need it all right? I want it all. Brand new socks and okay, yeah, that's something different. It's all Black history. Okay. So, within 50 years of St. Mark's arrival in Alexandria, a fragment of New Testament writings appeared in Oxyrhynchus, I guess it's commonly known today as Banasa, which suggests that Christianity had actually already begun to spread south of Alexandria at an early date. So Mark had only been there about 50 years, and there was already fragments of writings appearing. in that area. At that time, of course, they wouldn't have been fragments. They would have been the whole writings. So Mark got there either, it's one or two ways. And the traditional explanation is Mark got there and got to work. Or the other explanation, which is actually more plausible, is that the work was already being done before Mark was doing that. And just to kind of, because again, this is history, just to kind of give you this, there's a distinctly African character in New Testament literature that an evangelist by the name of Philip runs into. All right, this story takes place in what is called the Book of Acts. Philip runs into a brother whose name who is a Ethiopian eunuch, or they call him an Ethiopian eunuch. I'm very careful about what the Western Bibles translate as eunuch. All right, because a lot of times that word was not literal. It was not used literal, but it was used derogatory. Okay, so you come across an Ethiopian brother who worked for the Queen of Ethiopia, and he was reading the book of Isaiah when Philip rolled up. All right, and everybody like to focus on the part that he says, I was reading something I was confused by. Can you explain to me? We like to confuse black brother. But what I thought was interesting is that number one, he was reading. That's interesting because one of the things that people like to say about the disciples, and if the disciples, they said the disciples were illiterate. That's what they like to say. And then you got this Ethiopian brother who is literate. All right. So he is reading, and what he's reading, he's apparently reading the book of Isaiah. So whoever crafted this story acknowledged that there were Ethiopians who could read, that there was a queen of Ethiopia, and that the Ethiopians knew the story or had access to the Tanakh or the Hebrew Bible. You see that? Okay, so which means if Ethiopia had access, then surely Egypt had access as well. Ethiopia is south of Egypt, which is another interesting dichotomy. All right, so by the mid-3rd century, a sizable number of Egyptians were persecuted by the Romans, which again we're calling them the Byzantines or the Eastern Roman Empire. Beginning with the Edict of Decius, Christianity was tolerated, or had been tolerated in the Roman Empire until around AD 284. When the emperor, or Common Era 284, when the emperor Diocletian persecuted and put to death a great number of Christian Egyptians. Now, this event became a watershed in the history of Egyptian Christianity. And it's hard to really find information on this unless you're looking for it. I'm now giving you the tools to look for it just by giving you the knowledge and opening your doors. And so go look for this. Go look up Egyptian Christian persecution, Coptic Christian persecution, or persecution of the Coptic Church, and specifically look for stuff prior to the 11th century. All right. Okay. So this event became a watershed in the history of Egyptian Christianity, marking the beginning of a distinct Egyptian or Coptic church. All right. It became known as the era of the martyrs, and is commemorated in the Coptic calendar, in which dating of the years began with the start of Diocletian's reign. Now, when Egyptians were persecuted by Diocletian, many retreated to the desert to seek relief, through relief of the spirit and of its worldly desire to attain peace and unity with Christ and the Creator, not escaping the persecutions. Okay, so they go out there and basically develop this new style of theology, which is what we today call monasticism. So again, so not only do we have the first black church, I done gave you the black church, the first church was black, the first pope was black, but also the first monks were black. Now, if you want to check that information out, all you have to do is research the Desert Fathers. All right, that's what they're called. All right, so this created this precipitated the rise of monasticism, for which the Egyptians, namely Saint Anthony, Saint Bacchum, Saint Shenandoah, and Saint Amun, look at that, are credited as pioneers. By the end of the 4th century, it is estimated that the mass of the Egyptians had either embraced Christianity or were nominally Christian. And that's what's important right there. Nominally Christian, which means Christian by name. Okay. Now, in 541 AD, following the Council of Chalcedon, I said it right. Do y'all remember that? At the beginning, I said 451. 451 AD, following the Council of Chalcedon, the Church of Alexandria was divided into two branches. Those who accepted the terms of the council became known as the Chalcedonians or the Melkites, and those who did not abide by the council's term were labeled non-Chalcedonians or Monophysites, and later Jacobites after Jacob Baradius. The non-Chaldeans, however, rejected the term Monophysites as erroneous and insisted on being called Miaphysites. Now that's one version of the story. Another version of the story says that the non-Chalcedonians rejected the term Miaphysites because Miaphysites was actually a word that they were kind of used to kind of create a middle ground between both people. But this is one of the earlier places that we see a distinct split in the church, that though on paper it seems at first that it's solely theologically based, it becomes a little different than that. And especially knowing the Council of Nicaea, because the Council of Nicaea, the creeds declared that the Council of Nicaea reasserted the authority of the Alexandrian church. All right, reasserted the authority of the Alexandrian church, which means the black church, and though not calling it primary, acknowledged it as chief among equals. This is Alexandria, and also acknowledged that the customs or that the ancient traditions of those people were correct. All right, this is why when I hear people talking about the Nicene Creed, I automatically know they haven't read it. They haven't read anything. All right. So go read it, man. I promise you, you'll be like, dang. All right. This is Black history our way. Everything we do is FUBU, for us, by us. Okay. So the non-Chalcedonians, they become ultimately what we know as the Coptic Church, and everybody else become ultimately what we know as the Catholic Church, which everything in the West, at least as far as we know on this side, is an offshoot of that. So this is the first time we see, once you kind of pay attention, an actual race-based split. At first you don't know that, because if you're just reading history, you're reading it colorblind. But once you actually start studying it, you kind of got to know the colors. You don't know one species of bird apart from the other if you don't know your colors, right? You can't even fly. You can't fly a plane if you're colorblind. So if you can't fly a plane if you're colorblind, how are you going to study history? Right? So when you start studying history, using all your eyes, all the skills that the good Lord gave you, when you start studying history in that manner, you do see this picture, and you start seeing those race-based splits very early in history. Okay? Because this isn't the first time. This is one of the first times in the Christian aspect of the history. Okay? And you'll see that again if you study the Muslim history. The history of Islam, as opposed. You see this time when it's kind of really dark, really black, and then this time where it just gets lighter and lighter, and then nobody talks about those early days anymore. All right, so most of us we're actually a part of that white church, and so, which I'm not saying is good or bad. I have my own opinions about that. But at the very least, you should associate yourself with the theology of the first church, the early church, the black church, and the black church that has continued down at its legacy. Now, the majority of the Egyptians belong to the non-Chalcedonian branch. You see that? So the majority of the Egyptians were Coptic. That's actually why that branch became known as the Coptic, which literally means the Nubian church or the black church. Okay? Because the majority of the people who belonged to it were these native Egyptians and these native Ethiopians and these native Sudanese. All right? So, all right. And this actually led to some big problems, because what the Romans thought they were going to be able to do is they thought, because they were willing to share similarities in religion with the ancient Egyptians, that they could convince the ancient or medieval Egyptians close to this time. They thought they can convince them to do it their way. You just do it the way we do it, and we can just forget about the old ways. And these people in medieval Egypt weren't going. They were like, nah, man, y'all just do it y'all way. We'll do it our way, and everybody will be happy. And so, the Romans, the white folk weren't too happy with that arrangement. They're like, no, we want what we want, and we want it now. That becomes a pattern down history, doesn't it? And so, so basically, from there, create some problems. The first major persecutions begin to arise during the reigns of Emperor Marcian, which is between 450 and 457, and Leo, which is between 457 and 474. That's a quite a long time there. We're talking about 24 years, and then this continued until temporarily the Arab conquest of Egypt. All right. So now we kind of put this story in perspective. So the Romans had been kind of allowed to settle there. And let's go back and look at that map. Y'all want to look at that map again? Let me see here. Let me get rid of St. Mark. Go back and look at the map. What I want you to know here, this is the Byzantine Empire. But when you study it, this is also the extent of the Greek Empire, pretty much at its height. This area gets conquered a lot. Conquered with quotes. This area gets conquered a lot, the coastal area, and this green don't go down too far, and it is not very wide at all. All right. So I want to kind of destroy this illusion for a moment that Egypt just kept getting conquered. Okay. Egypt actually never kept getting conquered and colonized, because that's actually not what happened. That's not the case. Everybody who called themselves a conqueror of Egypt stayed they behinds right up here. If I was sure kids wasn't watching, I would have said something else. But everybody who came to what we call conquer Egypt, they stayed they behinds right up here. And Egypt was much bigger than that. They stayed at the tippity top of what was known as Lower Egypt, which all of these were trade areas. Okay, everything on the coast, these are trade areas, right? Look at this. These are trade areas. So it's not even a conquered. These are partnerships. Yeah, we'll allow you to settle here. We'll allow you to do some things. And you don't really understand that, or you don't really get that picture until you actually start doing the research for yourself, or we have people like us who are willing to start raising up educators to teach these things, or just study these things rather, so that we can start getting the right perspective. And the primary way to do this is to actually study the relationships that were going on, study some of the things that were written between these people. And so there really wasn't a conquering of Egypt. There was not a conquering of Egypt until, or at least the whole of Egypt, until we get much later in history, around 10th or 11th century. And so what's going on here is that the Byzantines have gotten aggravating to the Egyptians, who have been putting up with them, who at first, allowed them to come on in. Yeah, sure, we're cool. And then a bunch of stuff went sour, and the Egyptians were like, all right, we see y'all done killed the ones that we were cool with, but it is what it is. Y'all can stay over there. See, people say, well, no, the Romans were pharaoh over Egypt. No, they were not. Egypt is much bigger than the Roman territory ever was. Ever was. Understand that. This is known. Okay? So, so what you have here then, what you have here is the medieval Egyptians decided that these Byzantines are becoming a nuisance, because now they are trying to flex their authority like their conquerors. They're now trying to make stuff happen. And, they're now they done got rid of our Pope and gave us this other guy under false guises. And now this guy, thankfully, turned out to be one of the good guys. This whole time, he's working out arrangements, and he ends up running into this guy named Muhammad, which is not the Muhammad, not the prophet. But this is another guy who's a part of that movement, who's coming to conquer. This guy, at this time, the Arabians had some issues with the Romans, and they felt like Alexandria was the best way to handle it. And so Cyrus, what he does is, Bishop Cyrus, he organizes a treaty with this guy, and he says, I'll tell you what, we, the Egyptians, we will let you come through and go ahead and get to Alexandria, which, mind you, was not originally an Egyptian city. Hello. Alexandria was built by Alexander. As a thank you for getting rid of our last partners, we'll give you a little bit of land on the coast. All right, this was the agreement. Okay, so Bishop Cyrus says, look, I'll get all of my folk, all of my people, and this is where you see the church militant here, because Bishop is Bishop, he ain't just preaching, and praying. Bishop got a military in his arm. He said, "Oh, my crew will stand back." He said, "They'll stand back. Y'all just come through, handle them. We got to keep up appearances and all of that." And so he actually works out this deal. And as we already went over the specifics. So the Muslims come in, everything is cool. He works out the same deal with them that they worked out prior with the Egyptians. Okay, so now since 639, northern Egypt, which is up there, and it's really, I don't even want to say, we'll just say the coastal northern Egypt was in Islamic hands with the relation to the Nubian Coptic Christians, eventually ranging from tolerance to open persecution. So then watch this. They get up into that same situation here. In the 12th century, the church actually relocated from Alexandria to Cairo because it got so bad. And I think I have that map here. Do I have you? Let's see here. Let me get that map for you. Yep. Just to kind of show you what that territory looks like. You see Alexandria, and then you see Cairo. All right, so they because of this agreement, they were keeping their headquarters here for a while because we got another good partnership, and this partnership began to fail just like the last one. So they said, we're going to go ahead and move down to Cairo. We can't deal with this anymore. Primarily because they have a little more reinforcement there. Okay, so the same century actually also marked the point where Nubians became a minority in their own country. Since the 14th and 15th century, Nubian Christianity was supplanted by Islam until the Ethiopian and Eritrean Tewahedo Church were granted autosuffle in 1959 and 1998, respectively. Since the Arab Spring in 2011, the Copts have been witnessing increased ethno-religious based discrimination violence. And of course, them being supplanted by Islam means that there's also with the same questions about some corruption possibly in Western texts. There's that now same concern about some corruption, Arabic corruption in the Eastern text. Okay, so you have to keep these things in mind. And mind you, this is after the time of Muhammad, who was favorable towards Africans. Okay, and so in next episode, we're actually going to talk about what happens right after this story. We're going to talk about how things begin to go south, and we're going to talk about one of the major victories in Black history. So that concludes our first episode of Black History Without Borders. I am so glad that you guys actually took the time and tuned in with us. Thanks for tuning in, and remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. See you next time.